Hey everybody, it's Garm here. I'm coming to you on a Sunday afternoon. Here with the director who's taking a little breather from running around and doing some errands between takes. I wanted to come on and share some things I've been spinning throughout the week. Just CDs here, CDs on this one. I hope you're all doing as well as possible given the current circumstances. I'm sure, like a lot of you, just kind of staying indoors and finding things to do here and there. Doing a lot of sorting of things and kind of gradually getting into projects that I've been putting off for a long time, and I think they're just on the horizon as far as getting into them. So I'll just get into what I've been spinning here, enjoying throughout the week. Some things that I've been, either came across recently or current listens, along with things I hadn't listened to in quite a long time. Rediscovering the collection as many of us do. Actually, I'll start in with what's currently playing. Vic Hennigan, live at the Gatherings in 2013. I first heard of him from Chuck Van Zyle's channel. It's a YouTube channel. He also hosts the overnight radio show Star's End out of Philadelphia, as well as being an electronic musician himself. Actually, I tuned into the show last night, and they were featuring Vic Hennigan. Because of everything that's going on, he wasn't able to play they do like an in-studio performance as well as the Gatherings performance at a local church. They weren't able to do it, of course, but I guess what happened was Vic was able to send a live recording that he had just done at home, send it to Chuck, and he was able to feature it on the show. So he was able to play on the show without actually being there. It was really nice. And you hear in the background here, really nice, I think some quite nice electronic, maybe somewhat Berlin school in a way, but very atmospheric and evocative. This one's on CD Baby. But, I would very much recommend getting into him. Yeah, Vic Hennigan. And if you go to Chuck Van Zyle's YouTube channel under his own name, there's quite a few recent postings of him, Vic Hennigan, playing overnight on the show, live in the studio. Lovely stuff. It's a group I've been into for quite some time, but I hadn't listened to this one in a while. Special Effects, double feature. Kelly Minucci on various guitars, and George Jinda on percussion. Joined by a nice host of guests here. Always had wonderful musicians playing with them. If you're familiar with them, I guess it's a kind of contemporary jazz, mixture of jazz and world. You could hear African and Latin, very much their own sound, particularly in the early days of the group. From about the mid 80s to the early 90s, they were very, after that, I think like a lot of contemporary jazz, it got a little bit maybe homogenized and sort of the sound more tailored for, what they wanted to hear on the radio, I suppose. But this earlier stuff is a particular favorite of mine personally. I know Gary's a big fan, and he'd done a wonderful video on them, kind of an overview several years ago. It was over an hour-long video, but if you want to be introduced to the group, watch his video on his Cosmic Pickle channel. Special Effects, very much recommended. Very positive, very upbeat, melodic, very, very, very enjoyable. And I remember hearing them from the early days of WNUA, kind of our, it was our local, contemporary jazz station from way back when. Of course, it's responsible for me getting into so much music over the years, musical star streams and everything else. An artist that needs a little introduction, Vangelis, Antarctica, from a soundtrack that was done, probably a lesser known, quite an overlooked album of his as far as soundtracks, following Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire, from a Japanese film. And the music itself is quite understated, but as ever, very evocative. Definitely paints a picture of a kind of bleak, desolate landscape, and yeah, just beautiful. If you know his music, definitely wouldn't be disappointed by this one. I think this was the official cover. I think, but I just like this better with the fur kids on there. So yeah, Vangelis. I've been playing this one a lot lately, in particular. It's a group that familiar to many of you, although this might be one of their lesser known albums. Maybe doesn't get quite as much acclaim as the early stuff. Soft Machine, Land of Cocaine, which I think was relatively later for them, I think about 1980. And I don't think this had any of the original members from the early years, from like the first 4 or 5 albums. They have some interesting guests on here. Jack Bruce on bass, Dick Morrissey tenor sax, John Taylor on Fender Rhodes, Carl Jenkins, who I think was pretty much the leader, main composer at this time. Much different than the early, I guess, more what you think of as the Canterbury sound, also being more psychedelic and freeform. A lot more structure in the music, and more orchestrated. It's more not exactly a big band feel, but with the horns, it kind of lends a little bit of that tone. Very colorful, very I'd say quite cinematic. Even kind of like they did. I know they were doing library music, like library albums at the time, and there's a lot of that in there. Definitely a different flavor from if you know them for their like an album like Third, which is probably one of their more popular ones. I know in the VC in particular, that one's a favorite. So this is quite different, but I think very worth hearing if you like just a different flavor to the group. It's a really nice one I hadn't played in quite some time. Celestial Rhythms. It's a collaboration between 3 space music planetarium composers. New York City Live '85. Mark Geodesium Peterson, John Seri, and Barry Hayes in collaboration here. 3 synthesists. A combination of their own original material, as well as some really neat versions of some really neat covers. They do Canon in D by Pachelbel. Probably the most upbeat version I've ever heard of, because usually it's more of a kind of a slow contemplative piece, but they give it some pep on this one. Yoda's Theme. Do a version of that composed by John Williams. Really neat version, hearing that all electronically. And I, Robot. Cover that piece from the Alan Parsons project. And they do it pretty close to the original. Again, since that one was, I think that was primarily electronic. Very enjoyable if you like the kind of, the kind of darker atmospheric space music, but they add a lot of whimsy to it, as well as being a little more upbeat at times. Even downright, there's one piece in particular that almost kind of silly in a way, the way the drum machine is used, but really a lot of fun. And probably a lesser known album by all the artists. And it's on the Loch Ness Productions label, which is Mark C. Peterson, also known as Geodesium's label. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Definitely recommend. Get a few more here. Osamu, Sweet Chaos, Japanese artist. If you're familiar with his work, a really nice blend of his native Japan with more Western forms, progressive rock and jazz, with traditional Japanese. It's another album where you hear more of his whimsical side. Very playful and with the technology of the time. In the late 80s, 1989 on Mesa. And this was a featured album on a very early edition of Musical Starstreams. I distinctly remember taping in early 1991 in the winter. they featured Along the Beam and Living Colors. And I still listen to that particular recording from almost 30 years ago. It took a while before I finally got around to getting the album. You also do a version of I Feel Fine by the Beatles. Again, with this very distinctive style. Osamu Kitajima, Sweet Chaos. An artist I've enjoyed for, only got into him maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, but you know, always go through these kicks where I want to hear a lot of Tis Van Leer from the band Focus. I think it was Ron, old pal Ronco, My Lung Puppy, showed an album by Jan Ackerman. It's also in Focus. But you have to say, I'm really happy to see Ron back on doing videos. He hadn't been around in a while, and he's been making up for lost time. If you know his channel, My Lung Puppy, excellent, and really glad to see him back. He's doing quite a few videos lately. But yeah, he was mentioning Jan Ackerman, who also played in Focus. And these are culled mostly from these introspection albums of the 70s. A nice blend of sort of classical, easy listening, a little bit of progressive rock. Yeah, collections. A lot of flute and orchestra, and I think it's Letty D. Jong does vocals, and Roger Van Outerloo does the arrangements. Really beautiful, you know, pastoral sounding, very healing. Yeah, I recommend any of those introspection albums. And this is, again, a really nice kind of compilation to those. Good introduction to him in general. It's one I found out in, I don't know if I'd shown this one, out on my AZ trip. Fatburger, all natural ingredients. I've been a fan of them for a while, since the WNUA days. This particular one I hadn't heard, and they call this the cheesecake cover, cheeseburger cover. So I was a little dubious about it, but I thought, well, it's a group I like, so it had actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Especially, it was recorded in '96, which again for me, this sort of contemporary jazz, I felt got a little watered down by then, a little homogenized. But this is actually quite good. You have guitar, saxophone, keyboards, bass, drums. Yeah, from 1996 on Shanichi. They do some covers on here too. Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Oi Como Va. Pretty nice covers. I do prefer the original tunes, but it's still quite good. It has some nice, it's catchy and upbeat, but also has the sound of pretty distinctive sound of the group. But I'd still recommend if you come across this cheaply enough, and I think, I'm pretty sure most of these can be found, you find them online to listen to, YouTube or otherwise. But, yeah, Fatburger, real nice, fun, upbeat stuff. Just a few more here. Floating Flower, First and Second. It's a side project of Kawabata Makoto. Yeah, Kawabata Makoto, probably best known for being in Acid Mother's Temple. Guitar and synthesizers, various instruments. Plays electric and acoustic guitar on here. Joined by Kaneko Tutsuya on tablas and electric guitar, and Yuki on vocal, violin, and electric sitar. Her vocals are more kind of blended in with the other instrumentation rather than a lead voice, kind of wafting in and out of the mix. Very nice blend. Kind of evokes images of, I think of it as traveling through the desert, maybe on horseback or camel, but in slow motion, kind of. It has a really nice lumbering quality to it, very kind of hazy, and just kind of taking the time out to absorb your surroundings. But yeah, really nice traveling music. as much East Indian as, further into Asia. At least that's what this sounds like the influences are from. Really, really nice. If you like Acid Mother's Temple, this would be another side to what you're used to hearing. And Kawabata Makoto's work is so interesting and diverse anyway. But yeah, I'd recommend giving it a listen. Floating Flower, first and second. A couple more here. Another old favorite here. Going back to the early days. Yanni, Niki Nana, from 1989. A little bit different than the work that he was doing even earlier than this on private music. It was mainly solo keyboards in the studio with Charlie Adams on drums. There's some additional instrumentation and some vocals on here. Carmen Twilly on lead vocals. Ralph Rickart on flugelhorn. Joaquin Leovano on guitars. So extra added instrumentation and textures. A little more orchestration. Music got maybe a little more grandiose at this point, but still very enjoyable and upbeat, and yeah, just always brings me back. I know Derek was talking about, he's mentioning Ryuichi Sakamoto, of course a favorite artist, a kind of comfort food in a sense. I guess Yanni, among others, is sort of like comfort food for me. Of course, could all use that. So the Goodwill edition here. Yanni's Niki Nana from 1989. It's an artist I got into fairly recently, though I hadn't listened to this particular one in a while. Christophe Spindle, Radio Exotique. I learned of this from KJC Music's channel. One of those artists who had been around for quite a while, but kind of right under one's nose, but I hadn't realized it. Similar to somebody like Fatburger or that kind of contemporary jazz. Keyboard player, Yamaha DX7, Roland Juno 106. The commonly known of instruments of the time, the mid '80s. I think this one's from '85. I like what he does with harmony, just the way he plays. The chord changes. I think it was Rob from Sound Strange was talking about that in one of his videos. How harmony really does it for him in music. I'd say it does for me too. However distinctive and catchy a melody is, when the harmony's there, I think that's what really makes it what it is. It adds the richness and the imagery that it evokes. But I find it really does that on this album. It does that as well as being very, again, very positive and upbeat, and I'd say even invigorating. But very, very enjoyable, and great to revisit this. Christophe Spindle Group, Radio Exotique. And I think that's it for the main things I've been listening to throughout the week. There's been some vinyl too, but I'll get to that maybe my Thursday video. Also received Derek's new album on CD, 2020. I've given it one listen so far and very much enjoying it, but I'll try to come back on later in the week and speak of it further as I give it more listens. I'll just share a quick read here, reading a little bit of this. Walt Whitman, Song of Myself. I was watching an old documentary from the Voices and Visions series from PBS on YouTube. Try to remember taping off TV about 25 years ago. They had a wonderful documentary on him, so I was revisiting that and revisiting this as well. Wonderful, I guess maybe even somewhat prophetic writings, but yeah, very evocative, and always enjoy them. Definitely an inspiration on further writers of like the beat movement and everything. So yeah. So you're with the director resting. until the next one. So again, I hope you're all doing as well as possible. I was telling a couple friends these last couple of days the old adage, which is sure very familiar to most of you, and even though it may sound a little corny and cliched on the surface, where there's crisis, there's opportunity. It's been rolling through my mind these last couple days, really like a mantra, like without consciously thinking of it. It's just been there, and it just keeps coming back, and just I guess a reminder that whether practicing the small things of everyday life, doing things around the house, or just following one's own thought patterns and emotions, and thinking of where we're at and where we could be collectively, just something I think it's definitely more than helpful to bear in mind. And that just well, I'll leave you all at that. I don't want to carry on too long or start rambling more, but it's just something I'm keeping in mind and staying in practice with. So again, hope you're all doing as well as possible with everything, staying safe and enjoying the inner life both surrounding you and even going even deeper. So from director and I and producers around somewhere, what's the next one? Peace, love, and joy.